My name is Elena Harper, and 6 months ago, I was supposed to marry into one of the richest families in the city. The Whitmores did not shout when they were cruel. They smiled. They used polished words like tradition, legacy, refinement, and suitability. They made humiliation sound like manners. They made exclusion feel like etiquette. They could cut someone open with a sentence and still make the room believe they had offered a compliment. And on the night of my engagement party, they made my parents serve drinks. Not officially. People like the Whitmores never did anything officially when shame could be hidden behind elegance. The party was held at their estate, a limestone mansion with ivy climbing the walls, white roses on every table, and waiters moving through the room with silver trays of champagne. The chandeliers looked like frozen rain. The windows opened toward a garden where lanterns hung from old trees, glowing softly as if even the night had been hired to flatter them. I stood near the fireplace in a champagne-colored dress Julian's mother had chosen because, as she said, something warmer softens your background. At the time, I pretended not to understand what she meant. Then I saw my mother. May Harper was not sitting at the family table. She was not beside me. She was not being introduced as the mother of the bride. She was holding a tray of champagne. Her smile was small and careful as a man in a navy suit took a glass without looking at her face. My mother had the kind of hands that always knew what to do. Hands that kneaded dough, folded laundry, cooled my fever, packed my lunch, and held mine through every hard year. That night, those hands were wrapped around a silver tray, as if she had been invited there to carry other people's comfort. Then I saw my father. Robert Harper was bent near the marble floor, picking up broken glass with a folded napkin while a woman in diamonds lifted her dress away from the spill. Someone said, "Careful, someone should clean that." My father nodded, quietly, patiently. Like helping was never beneath him, even when people used his kindness to lower him. I turned to Julian. He had seen it. I know he had seen it because his jaw tightened. His eyes moved from my father to his mother, then away. Not confused, not shocked, uncomfortable. That was worse. Before I could move, Vivian Whitmore appeared beside me. Julian's mother was beautiful in the way expensive things are beautiful, polished, cold, and not meant to be questioned. She followed my gaze and gave a delicate laugh. Your parents seemed much more comfortable helping than pretending to belong at the table. For a moment, I could not breathe. The music kept playing. Glasses kept shining. Guests kept laughing softly under the chandeliers. No one else seemed to feel the room tilt. No one else seemed to hear the violence hidden beneath her soft voice. I looked back at my mother. She felt my eyes and turned. Then she smiled. Not because she was happy. Because she was telling me, "Please don't make this harder for yourself." Julian murmured, "Elena." I looked at him. He did not go to my parents. He did not correct his mother. He only lowered his voice and said, "Not here." That was the first time the ring on my finger felt less like a promise and more like a warning. It was a 6-carat diamond from Julian's grandmother, a Whitmore heirloom. They loved saying that. It represented endurance, continuity, legacy. But as I watched my mother carrying champagne and my father standing at the edge of a room where he should have been honored, I understood what it really meant. Behave. Smile. Be grateful. Rise into the world we are allowing you to enter. For weeks, I had ignored the small signs. The way Vivian corrected my pronunciation of French menu items. The way Charles asked if my parents would understand the scale of a Whitmore wedding. The way Julian always squeezed my hand when I started to speak, as if love meant learning when to stay quiet. That night, before dessert was served, I took off the ring. The room noticed before Julian did. The diamond caught the chandelier light as I held it between 2 fingers. For one strange second, everyone stared as if I were admiring it. Instead, I dropped it into Julian's champagne glass. It hit the crystal with a sharp, clean sound and sank through the bubbles. Then I looked at him and said, "You can keep the diamond. I'm taking my parents home." No one spoke. And maybe that was the saddest part. For the first time all night, when silence could no longer protect them, they finally understood how loud it had been. But before I tell you how that moment ended my engagement, you need to know what my parents had done that morning. Because humiliation looks different when you know how carefully someone prepared to be respected. My father polished his shoes 3 times that afternoon. They were old black shoes, the same ones he had worn to my college graduation, my first gallery opening, and my grandmother's funeral. He tilted them toward the light as if inspecting fine furniture instead of worn leather. "Dad," I said, smiling, They're already shining. He looked up over his glasses. Then they can shine a little more. That was my father. He believed care was visible. He believed showing up properly for someone mattered, even if no one else noticed the effort. My mother came out of the hallway in a soft blue dress, then looked down at herself uncertainly. Is this too bright? She asked. Vivian said neutral colors photograph better. She didn't mean you had to disappear, Mom. My mother smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. I just don't want to embarrass you, sweetheart. That sentence hurt more than I let her see. I stood and took both her hands. Mom, you could never embarrass me. My parents were not wealthy. Our house had creaky floors, a stubborn kitchen drawer, and a dining table my father built when I was 9. That table had seen homework, bills, birthday cakes, late-night worries, and every meal my mother stretched so I could finish school without hearing how tight money was. There were no oil portraits in our hallway, no marble staircase, no silver crest on the front gate, but there was warmth. There was the smell of soup on rainy evenings. There was my mother humming while washing dishes. There was my father measuring twice before cutting once, not just in carpentry, but in life. There were apology notes left on the counter after arguments. There were patched sleeves, saved receipts, and laughter that did not need an audience. Robert Harper had spent 30 years restoring old woodwork in churches, schools, libraries, and historic homes. Though he never spoke of it like a title, he never called himself an artist. He simply said, I fix things people still want to keep. He could run his hand along an old banister and tell where the wood had swollen, where it had been repaired badly, where the original work was still breathing underneath the damage. He respected old things because he understood what time did to them. He knew some cracks were not failures. They were records of survival. When I was a child, I thought everyone's father could make broken things whole. Maybe that was why I trusted Julian when he first came to dinner. He helped my mother carry bowls to the table. He complimented my father's handmade dining table. He asked questions about old wood and restoration, and he seemed genuinely interested. My mother watched him that night with quiet relief. After he left, she said, he listens when your father talks. That was the kind of thing she valued. Not money, not posture. Listening. A few months later, Julian brought an old chair from his apartment to my father's workshop. It had belonged to his grandfather, but one leg was cracked and the seat had loosened. My mother says it isn't worth repairing, Julian said. But I always liked it. My father studied it like a patient. Leave it with me. 2 weeks later, Julian came back. The chair stood in the center of the workshop, polished but not made new, steady without losing its history. My father had repaired the weakness without erasing the years. He had kept the small scratches on the armrest because Julian said his grandfather used to tap his fingers there while reading. Julian ran his hand across the wood. You saved it, he said. My father smiled. Most things can be saved if people stop treating them like they're already broken. At the time, Julian looked at me like he understood. That memory would later become one of the sharpest parts of the whole story. Because Julian knew my father, he knew my mother's cooking, my parents' kindness, the dignity in that small house. He knew we were not people pretending to belong. We belonged to each other long before the Whitmores knew our names. But love can make you soften warnings. When Julian's father first met mine and said, "So you work with your hands," Julian told me, "My father is old-fashioned." When Vivian called my mother a sweet little woman, Julian said, "She says that about everyone." When his sister asked if my parents were comfortable around formal service, Julian squeezed my hand and whispered, "They're just trying to make sure everyone feels at ease." There was always a softer translation, always an excuse, always a way to dull the blade without removing it. That afternoon, my mother packed a lemon almond cake in a white box tied with ribbon. "I know they'll have catering," she said, almost apologetically. "But I thought we could bring something from us." My father carried it to the car like it was fragile. On the drive to the Whitmore estate, my mother smoothed her dress 3 times. My father checked the address twice. They were nervous. In the tender way, good people become nervous when entering spaces designed to remind them they are outsiders. When we arrived, Julian met us at the door. He kissed my cheek, shook my father's hand, hugged my mother, and for a moment I felt my fear loosen. Maybe it would be fine. Maybe I had been too sensitive. Maybe tonight, with everyone watching, his family would remember that money could buy flowers, music, and champagne, but it could not buy the right to humiliate people. Then Vivian appeared behind him with her perfect smile. "May, Robert, she said warmly. How lovely. You came early. My mother brightened. Of course. Your email said you might need a little help. I looked at Julian. What email? His hand stiffened around mine. And that was when I saw, in his face, that he knew something I did not. Vivian's email was printed and folded neatly in my mother's purse. She was so thoughtful, Mom said, handing it to me. She wanted us to feel included. I unfolded the paper. Dear May. Warm, polished, poisonous. Vivian wrote that she wanted my parents to be part of the evening in a meaningful way. Then came the list. May could arrive early to help check the kitchen. Robert might be useful for a few practical setup tasks. Neutral colors would help the family photographs maintain a cohesive palette. And since the program was quite full, speeches would be limited to the Whitmore side. I read it once. Then again. Mom, I said slowly, why didn't you show me this? She looked embarrassed. I didn't want to bother you. This isn't bothering me. This is assigning you work. My father said softly, Ellie. He always used my childhood nickname when he wanted to call me before I got hurt. Julian stepped closer. Elena, can we take a breath? I turned to him. You knew? Not exactly. That's not an answer. My mother mentioned she wanted them involved. Involved? I held up the paper. She told my mother to blend into the background and my father to help with setup. Julian lowered his voice. She's just particular. Please don't turn this into a class war. A class war. As if my parents' dignity was an inconvenience. As if asking not to be treated like staff at their daughter's engagement party was aggression. I stared at him. If my mother asked your father to move chairs at our family dinner, would you still call it particular? He did not answer. Behind him, Vivian watched us with serene patience, like a woman waiting for a child to stop fussing. My mother touched my arm. Elena, it's all right. We don't mind helping. That's not the point. My father looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the truth. He knew. Of course he knew. My parents were kind, not foolish. They had spent decades reading rooms where people with more money mistook politeness for permission. They knew when they were being lowered. They had simply chosen, for my sake, to walk into that house smiling. That realization nearly hurt worse than the email itself. They had seen the insult before I did. They had carried it quietly so I would not have to. Vivian approached and kissed the air beside my mother's cheek. May, you look lovely. That shade is very cheerful. Then her eyes moved to the cake box in my father's hands. Oh, how sweet. You brought something. It's Elena's favorite, my mother said. Vivian took the box by the ribbon. We'll place it in the kitchen with the other food. The other food. Not on the dessert table. Not introduced as something made by the mother of the bride. Just absorbed into the machinery of the event, like my mother herself. I stepped forward. Actually, I'd like it on the dessert table. Vivian's smile stayed still, but her eyes sharpened. Of course, dear. We'll see what fits. Julian murmured. Elena. That was the sound of the whole night. Not stop, mother. Not May made that for us. Just my name, spoken like a warning. Guests began arriving. Cars rolled up the long driveway. Women in silk, men in tailored suits. People who kissed cheeks without touching skin and asked questions that were really judgments in disguise. At first, my parents stayed close to me. My mother admired the flowers. My father studied the carved mantel over the fireplace and whispered, "That's original oak. Late 19th century, I'd guess." I smiled. "You can't turn it off, can you?" He shrugged. "Old things speak." Julian heard him and gave a small smile, but he said nothing. I wondered, even then, whether he was proud of my father's knowledge or afraid someone important would hear it coming from the wrong kind of man. For a little while, I convinced myself the evening might still survive. Then Charles Whitmore came over. He shook my father's hand, then looked toward the garden doors. "Robert, would you mind helping the staff move a few chairs? We've had a last-minute adjustment." My father paused. So brief someone else might have missed it, but I saw it. The tiny stillness of a man deciding whether to swallow disrespect for his daughter's happiness. "Of course," he said. "No," I said. Everyone turned. "My father is a guest." Charles blinked. "It's only a few chairs." Vivian appeared beside him. "Darling, Robert seems handy." Handy. Useful. Practical. Never honored. My father put a gentle hand on my shoulder. "It's all right, Ellie." No, it wasn't. But his eyes begged me not to pay for his pride that night. So I stood there burning while my father followed a staff member toward the garden. Julian watched him go. I watched Julian. Say something, I whispered. He looked uncomfortable. I'll talk to them later. Later. People like Julian always believed there would be a later. Later, when no one was watching. Later, when apology cost less than courage. But I stayed. I stayed because my mother was smiling too hard. I stayed because my father came back and pretended moving chairs had been nothing. I stayed because, for one last hour, I wanted to believe love could still rise above cowardice. Then the champagne trays came out, and the night became something I could never forgive. The first person to hand my mother an empty glass was a woman in diamonds. She did not even look at my mother's face. "Thank you," she said, placing the glass into my mother's hand. My mother looked down, confused for half a second. Then she smiled. That was the worst part. Not because she wanted to serve, because she did not want the woman to feel embarrassed. My mother, mistaken for staff at her daughter's engagement party, still protected the comfort of the person who insulted her. I moved toward them, but Vivian reached the scene first. For one breath, I thought she would correct it. I thought she would say, "This is May Harper, Elena's mother." That would have been enough. Instead, Vivian took the glass and said smoothly, "May has been so kind helping us keep things flowing." Keep things flowing, like my mother was part of the service, like this had been arranged. My mother's cheeks flushed. "Mom," I said. She turned quickly. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." "Elena," she whispered, touching my wrist, "please. Don't ruin your night for us, sweetheart." That sentence broke something in me. Not Vivian's cruelty. Not the guest's carelessness. My mother's willingness to disappear so I could remain acceptable to people who did not deserve me. My father appeared beside us, brushing dust from his sleeve. "All good?" he asked. His voice was steady, but I saw the strain around his mouth. "Dad, we should go." He looked at me carefully. "Is that what you want?" What I wanted was complicated. I wanted Julian to step forward. I wanted Vivian to apologize. I wanted Charles to realize my father was not a man you summoned to move furniture. I wanted the night to repair itself without me having to destroy it. That was the last small childish hope I had left, that the people who hurt you would suddenly understand before you had to bleed in public. Julian joined us, placing a hand lightly on my back. "Everything okay?" I turned to him. "Your mother just let someone treat my mom like staff." Julian's eyes moved toward Vivienne. "I'm sure it was a misunderstanding." It stopped being a misunderstanding when she didn't correct it. He swallowed. My father spoke before Julian could answer. "It's all right. These things happen." "No," I said. "They happen because people let them." Julian's hand fell from my back. "Elena, please don't escalate every small thing. Every small thing. A chair, a cake, a dress color, a glass, a mother's embarrassment, a father's swallowed dignity. Individually, the Whitmores could explain all of it away. Their cruelty came in pieces small enough to deny, but heavy enough to bury you." I asked Julian, "How many small things does it take before you call it disrespect?" He did not answer. Across the room, Charles laughed with a group of men near the fireplace. One of them gestured toward my father and said something I could not hear. Then they laughed again. My father looked at the mantel instead of at them. I knew that move. He was giving his attention to something that could not insult him. I walked over. "Dad," he smiled. "This mantel is beautiful. Needs care though. See the split near the corner?" He was doing it again, turning pain into work, finding something useful to say so no one had to discuss what had been done to him. "You don't have to pretend," I whispered. His smile faded. "I'm not pretending it didn't hurt," he said quietly. "I'm deciding it doesn't get to own me." I almost cried. Then he looked toward Julian. "Does he love you well?" The question caught me off guard. I turned. Julian was speaking to Vivienne. From a distance, it looked serious. For one hopeful second, I thought he was finally confronting her. Then Vivian touched his cheek, said something, and Julian lowered his head like a boy being corrected. My father saw it too. He said nothing. That silence hurt more than a warning. Dinner was not really dinner. It was stations, small plates, and conversations that moved like performances. People asked where I went to school, whether my parents were local, whether I found the Whitmore world overwhelming. One woman smiled and said, "You must feel like Cinderella." I looked at my mother near the kitchen door, helping a young server balance a tray because she had seen the girl struggling. "No," I said. "Cinderella's family was cruel before she got to the palace." The woman laughed, thinking I was joking. I wasn't. Across the room, my mother finally stood alone for a moment. She pressed her fingers against the side of her dress where the fabric had wrinkled from carrying trays. My father moved beside her and said something that made her smile. Even there, even in that room, they found each other. That was the moment I understood something I should have known all along. The Whitmores had money. My parents had shelter. Not a house. Shelter. The kind people build for one another with loyalty, apology, sacrifice, and small daily acts of care. Then came the speeches. Charles stood first and welcomed everyone to a celebration not only of love, but of continuity. He spoke about the Whitmore name, the businesses they built, the homes they preserved, the ring, the responsibility of carrying legacy forward. He did not mention my parents. Not once. Then Vivian stood. Julian took my hand. His palm was damp. Just let her finish, he whispered. I looked at him. Why would you say that before she starts? He did not answer. Vivian lifted her glass. And with one perfect smile, she began the speech that ended my engagement. When a family grows, Vivian began, it is always a moment of reflection. Her voice was soft enough that people leaned in. The Whitmores have always believed marriage is not merely a private feeling. It is a joining of histories, of values, of expectations, of legacy. Julian's fingers tightened around mine. I looked at him, but he kept his eyes on his mother. Julian was raised to understand that love is important, Vivian continued. But love must also be supported by refinement, discipline, and an appreciation for the world one is entering. The world one is entering. Not the world two people build together. The world I was being allowed into. Vivian turned toward me. Elena has brought warmth into Julian's life. A sincerity we all find very touching. Touching, like I was a handmade ornament. And we are proud, she said, to help Elena become part of something greater than what she came from. The room applauded. Not everyone. Enough. Enough to make the insult sound approved. Enough to make my mother lower her eyes. Enough to make my father's jaw tighten. I waited. Not for Vivian. I expected nothing from her. I waited for Julian. I looked at the man I had planned to marry. Not with anger. With hope. One word from him could have saved everything. Not the party. Not the engagement. But us. He could have said, Mother, that's enough. He could have lifted his glass and said, I'm honored to join Elena's family too. He could have brought my parents to the center of the room. He could have done something small and brave and human. Instead, Julian looked down at his champagne. His mouth barely moved. Not now. 2 words. As if there were an appropriate time to defend someone's dignity. As if humiliation worked on a schedule. As if my parents could be restored later in private after being lowered in public. Something inside me became very calm. It was not rage. Rage would have shaken. Rage would have shouted. Rage would have given the Whitmores the satisfaction of calling me unstable. This was clarity. I looked at my mother. She gave the smallest shake of her head. Please, her eyes said. Not because she wanted me to accept it. Because mothers like mine are trained by hardship to fear the cost of their daughters standing up. I looked at my father. He did not nod. He did not shake his head. He simply looked back at me. And in his eyes, I saw the workshop, the dining table, the chair he had fixed for Julian, and the sentence he had said with such quiet grace. Most things can be saved if people stop treating them like they're already broken. But some things should not be saved. Not when saving them means breaking yourself. Vivian was still speaking. Every bride must learn not only where she is going, she said, but what she must leave behind. There it was. The truth beneath the pearls. What she must leave behind. My house. My history. My parents. My mother's cake in the kitchen. My father's hands around broken glass. The old black shoes he had polished 3 times. I pulled my hand from Julian's. He turned sharply. Elena? I stepped toward the microphone. Vivian paused, still smiling, but her eyes flashed. Dear, I wasn't finished. I know, I said. My voice was steady. That surprised even me. I took the microphone. The room turned toward me, curious, amused, confused, some already delighted by the possibility of scandal. I saw Charles near the front. I saw Julian frozen beside me. I saw May, one hand at her throat. I saw Robert, still as oak. I want to thank the Whitmore family for teaching me something tonight. A soft ripple moved through the room. Not about refinement, not about legacy, not about how to rise into a world someone else believes is above you. Julian took one step closer. Elena, please. I did not look at him. I learned what it costs to be accepted by people who mistake kindness for weakness and humility for permission. The room went silent. Not quiet. Silent. I turned toward the edge of the room. Mom, Dad, would you come here, please? My mother shook her head faintly, tears in her eyes. My father took her hand. Together, they walked to me. No tray, no towel, no borrowed roll, just my parents. These are my parents, I said. Robert and May Harper. My father built every table I studied on. My mother worked double shifts so I could walk into rooms like this without bowing my head. May covered her mouth. I looked around the room. If anyone here mistook them for servants tonight, that says nothing about them. It says everything about you. Charles stepped forward. Now, wait a minute. No, I said. You've had all night. Julian finally moved. Elena, we can talk. I looked at him. Really looked. At the man who had eaten my mother's food, accepted my father's kindness, and still found silence easier than courage. I waited for you to talk all night. His face changed. That was when he understood. Not when my mother held the tray. Not when my father picked up glass. Not when his mother said I came from something lesser. Only when he was about to lose something he valued did Julian understand the cost of silence. I reached for the ring. The diamond resisted for a second, as if my finger had swollen around the life I almost accepted. Then it slipped free. Vivienne's face went white. Elena, she said sharply, do not embarrass yourself. I almost smiled. Mrs. Whitmore, you confused me with someone who still wants your approval. Then I dropped the ring into Julian's champagne glass. The sound was small. Crystal. Metal. A tiny bright ending. I loved you, I told him. But I will not marry a man who asks me to be quiet while my parents are humiliated. Then I took my mother's hand. My father walked on my other side. And together, we left the Whitmore estate while the room behind us remained perfectly, beautifully silent. If you had been standing where I stood that night, watching your parents swallow pain just to protect your future, would you have stayed quiet to save the engagement, or would you have returned the ring too? I did not know then that someone had recorded everything. And I definitely did not know that the first people to recognize my father in that video would not care about the diamond at all. The drive home was quieter than the party. My mother sat in the back seat with the cake box on her lap. Somehow, before leaving, she had gone to the kitchen and taken it back. That nearly broke me. Not the ring. Not Julian calling my name from the front steps. The cake. My mother carrying home the love she had offered to people who placed it out of sight. No one spoke for 10 minutes. Finally, my mother said, I'm sorry. Mom, I know you loved him. I loved who I thought he was. She looked down at her hands. Maybe he was just scared. My father turned slightly. May. It was gentle, but firm. My mother closed her mouth. After a while, my father said, Elena, did you leave because of us? I tightened my hands around the steering wheel. I left because of me. He nodded slowly. That seemed to matter to him. I don't want you making your life smaller, just to defend our pride. It wasn't pride. What was it? I swallowed. Proof. Proof of what? That I still knew who I was. When we reached home, my mother made tea because that was what she did when the world broke. Then she opened the cake box. The frosting had smudged slightly during the ride. I suppose we should eat it, she said. So we did. At midnight, in our old kitchen, still dressed for a party that had rejected us, the three of us ate lemon almond cake from chipped plates. It was the best thing I tasted all night. The next morning, sunlight came into the kitchen like nothing had happened. That felt offensive at first. The kettle still whistled. The neighbor still dragged his trash bin to the curb. My father still measured coffee with the same old spoon. The world had the nerve to continue. My phone lit up again and again. Julian called 17 times. Then he texted, Please answer. I'm sorry. You shocked everyone. My mother is devastated. We need to discuss this rationally. That last one made me laugh so sharply my mother looked up. What is it? Nothing worth reading. By noon, the Whitmore version had started spreading. People said I had an episode, that I felt insecure around Julian's family, that I embarrassed my parents by making a scene they never wanted, that I was not ready for the responsibilities of joining a public family. Public family. That phrase smelled like Vivienne's perfume. A friend from college called and said, Elena, I don't know what happened, but the way they're telling it sounds wrong. That was when I realized how powerful families protect themselves. They do not always deny what happened. They rename it. Humiliation becomes misunderstanding. Cruelty becomes tradition. self-respect becomes instability. Julian showed up after 2. My father saw him through the window. Do you want me to send him away? I looked at Julian on the porch, tired and pale, almost like the man I had loved. Almost. No, I said. I'll talk to him. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. Julian looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. Elena. Julian. I've been calling. I know. I was worried. No. You were losing control of the story. He flinched. That's not fair. Is it untrue? He looked away. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he said, I should have said something. The apology was small, but real. I looked at him. No. You should have known you had to. His eyes filled. My mother went too far. Your mother was exactly who she has always been. The only person who surprised me was you. He stepped closer. I froze. You looked down. I didn't know how to handle it in front of everyone. My parents were humiliated in front of everyone. He closed his eyes. I watched him struggle with shame, and for one dangerous second, I wanted to comfort him. But then I saw my mother holding that tray again, my father's hands around broken glass. And I stayed still. Julian opened his eyes. I love you. I know. Then let me fix it. Fix what? The party? The video? Your parents' opinions? Or the part of you that waited until after losing me to find courage? He swallowed. I'll talk to them. You should have talked to them when it cost you something. He looked toward the house. Can I apologize to your parents? I thought of my mother, who would accept too quickly, because she still felt guilty for being the reason I left. I thought of my father, who would be too polite. No. Not today. His face fell. What do you want from me? That was the saddest question. Because once, I would have had 1,000 answers. Choose me. Defend me. Respect where I come from. Understand that loving me means not making me translate cruelty into misunderstanding. Now I only had one. Nothing. He looked afraid then. Elena. You didn't lose me because your family insulted mine, I said. You lost me because you stood close enough to stop it and chose comfort instead. The door opened behind me. My father stepped onto the porch. Not threatening. Just present. Julian looked at him, and I saw the memory pass between them. The chair. The workshop. You saved it. Mr. Harper, Julian said, voice breaking. I'm sorry. My father studied him. I believe you are. Julian looked relieved for half a second. Then my father added, but regret and repair are not the same thing. Julian lowered his eyes. He nodded once and left. After his car disappeared, my father stood beside me in silence. Then he said, that chair he brought me. What about it? I remember thinking it was stronger than he knew. Just needed someone to stop leaning on the broken side. My throat tightened. Dad. He put an arm around my shoulders. Some people are like that too, he said. But you don't have to be the one holding them upright. That night, I took every photo of Julian from my bedroom wall. I did not tear them. I placed them in a box. That felt more final. Because rage sometimes leaves room for return. Careful packing does not. At first, the clip did not go viral because of the ring. That came later. At first, it spread quietly through preservation circles, because someone recognized the man holding the towel. The video was shaky, filmed by one of Julian's cousins from behind a floral arrangement. It showed my mother holding the champagne tray. My father near the side wall with a folded towel in his hand. Vivian at the microphone. Me stepping forward. The ring dropping into the glass. But the first comments were not about the diamond. One message appeared under a repost from an architecture account. Wait. Is that Robert Harper, the restoration carpenter from St. Bartholomew's and the Ellison Library? Then another. That's definitely Harper. Why is he holding a towel at a Whitmore party? Then a third. The man they treated like staff is one of the few people in the region who can still do period-accurate wood restoration by hand. By the second day, the story changed. It was no longer just about a runaway bride. It was about class. About dignity. About the quiet violence of polite humiliation. Someone wrote an article titled, "The man they mistook for staff was the craftsman their historic project needed." My father hated it. They make it sound like I'm somebody important, he muttered at the kitchen table. My mother stood behind him, hand on his shoulder. You are somebody important. He looked embarrassed. To you. To more people than you thought, I said. The article listed projects he had worked on over 30 years. Churches, schools, historic homes. A courthouse restoration he had never mentioned because, as he said, I only fixed the doors. Only fixed the doors. That was my father. A man could restore the entrance to a public building and still believe the important people were the ones walking through it. Then the article mentioned the Whitmore Heritage Hotel project. That changed everything. The Whitmores had purchased an old estate downtown and planned to turn it into a luxury heritage hotel. Their campaign was built around preservation, history, craftsmanship, and legacy. Beautiful words. Expensive words. But the Preservation Board had concerns. They needed specialists who understood original materials, not just designers who knew how to make new wood look old under warm lighting. One name had already been recommended months before: Robert Harper. My father had ignored the first inquiry because he was busy restoring a school library, and because, as he told me, big developers usually want the look of care without the patience for it. Now everyone knew the truth. The Whitmores had publicly humiliated the very man whose approval they might need. Charles called first. My father did not answer. Vivienne emailed. My mother deleted it. Julian texted me. Please, my father is trying to reach your dad. This is becoming complicated. I stared at the word complicated. Not wrong. Not shameful. Complicated. People like the Whitmores love that word. It turned consequences into weather. I did not respond. 3 days later, Julian came to my studio. I worked then for a small design firm that created community spaces, libraries, clinics, school interiors. Nothing glamorous enough for the Whitmores, but work that made me feel useful without making anyone smaller. Julian waited in the lobby. He looked tired, not destroyed. Julian still had money, family, opportunity, and a world designed to forgive him. But he looked like someone forced to sit alone with himself. I didn't come to ask you to talk to your father, he said. Good. He smiled faintly. I deserve that. I said nothing. I watched the video, he said. I lived it. I know. You're right. That surprised me. The old Julian would have explained, translated, softened, asked me to see intent instead of impact. This Julian stood there and accepted the truth. I saw your father holding that towel, he said. And I remembered the chair. The air changed. He was kind to me, Julian continued. He was always kind to me. Yes. And I let my family treat him like he was invisible. No, I said. You let them treat him like he was useful but not equal. That's different. He absorbed that. You're right. Hearing him say it did not heal me, but it mattered that he did not fight it. I'm ashamed, he said. You should be. His eyes filled, but he did not look away. I am. For a moment, I saw the man I wished he had been. Not enough to open the door. Enough to grieve what could have been. Did you ever think, I asked quietly, that my parents were something you had to rise above? He looked wounded. Then he looked honest. I think I let my family make me afraid of what choosing you completely would say about me. That answer hurt because it was probably the truth. And what did silence say about you? He lowered his eyes. Everything. Before he left, he said, my mother says you ruined the family. What do you say? He looked toward the street. I think you revealed it. That was the first honest thing he had said about them. Maybe about himself. That evening, my mother received a call from a woman on the Preservation Board. She asked whether Robert Harper might be willing to meet regarding the Whitmore Heritage Hotel restoration. My father shook his head before my mother even finished repeating the message. But 2 days later, Charles Whitmore came in person. Not to our house. To my father's workshop. Maybe he thought that would be more professional. Maybe he had no idea that my father was most himself in that room. The place where broken things waited to learn whether they could be saved. Charles Whitmore arrived at my father's workshop at 9 in the morning, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first car. He looked uncomfortable on the worn concrete floor. Not disgusted, just aware that nothing in the room cared who he was. The workshop smelled of cedar, varnish, dust, and coffee. Sunlight came through high windows. Along one wall, clamps held a carved panel from a church balcony. On the main table lay part of an old banister. My father was restoring for a school built in 1912. My father did not stop working when Charles entered. He looked up and said, Mr. Whitmore. Charles noticed the distance immediately. Mr. Harper, he said. I stood near the back, sorting sample boards, though everyone knew I was really there, because my mother had asked me not to let my father face him alone. My father did not need protection, but love sometimes insists on presence. I appreciate you seeing me, Charles said. I haven't agreed to see you, my father replied. You walked in during business hours. Charles looked startled. Then he cleared his throat. As you know, the The Whitmore Heritage Hotel project has reached a sensitive point with the Preservation Board. I read that. We need a specialist to evaluate the original woodwork and advise on restoration standards. Your name has been recommended. That was true before your party. Charles's face tightened. Yes. The word seemed painful for him. Good. Not because I wanted him humiliated. Because it was healthy for men like Charles Whitmore to taste the truth without seasoning. He took a breath. I want to apologize for the evening. My father said nothing. To both of you, Charles added, glancing at me. And to Mrs. Harper. Her name is May, my father said. Yes. To May. My father studied him. Do you know what you're apologizing for? Charles frowned. For the misunderstanding. My father set down his sanding block. No. Charles blinked. A misunderstanding is when someone takes the wrong coat. What happened that night was a decision repeated until it became an atmosphere. The workshop went still. You decided my wife's kindness made her available. You decided my hands made me staff. You decided my daughter should be grateful enough to stay quiet. And when she wasn't, you decided she was the problem. Charles looked smaller. I can't undo that night. No. But perhaps we can move forward professionally. There it was. The Whitmore instinct. Put pain in one room, business in another. Close the door between them. My father looked at the carved panel on his workbench. I restore old wood, Mr. Whitmore. Not rotten foundations. Charles's mouth tightened. I understand your anger. I'm not angry. And he wasn't. Anger burns hot and looks for somewhere to go. My father was steadier than that. A door closed from the inside. The project matters, Charles said. It will preserve an important piece of the city's history. History matters, my father replied. That's why I don't help people fake respect for it. Charles looked at him sharply. My father's voice stayed calm. You want the look of preservation, the story of care, the language of legacy. But legacy is not what you say about old buildings while stepping over living people. For 30 years, my father had spoken most clearly through his hands. That morning, he finally let someone hear the words behind them. Charles was quiet for a long time. Is there any condition under which you would consider consulting? My father looked at him. Yes. Charles's eyes lifted. If the board hires me independently, and if my report remains untouched by Whitmore approval, I won't work for you. I'll work for the building. Part of me had wanted him to refuse completely. I wanted the clean satisfaction of watching Charles leave with nothing. But my father had never been interested in revenge. He cared about what deserved saving. Not the Whitmore name, the building, the hands that had carved its old stair rail, the people who would walk through it long after Charles's embarrassment faded. Charles nodded slowly. I can arrange that. No, my father said. The board can. Charles looked down. Understood. He turned to leave, then paused. Mr. Harper, I am sorry. This time, he did not add misunderstanding. My father nodded once. I hope someday you know why. Charles left. I stood in the silence after him, unsure what to feel. Then my father picked up the sanding block and went back to work. That's it? I asked. He glanced at me. What were you expecting? Thunder? Maybe a little. He smiled faintly. Thunder is loud. Doesn't always fix the roof. I laughed. Then I cried. He pretended not to notice until I walked over and hugged him. His shirt smelled like sawdust. I'm proud of you, I whispered. He kissed the top of my head. I was proud of you first. The Preservation Board hired my father independently 2 weeks later. His report was strict, honest, and inconvenient. It delayed the Whitmore project by months and forced them to replace a decorative plan with real preservation work. It cost them money. It cost them control. Most of all, it cost them the ability to use words like legacy without being watched closely by people who now knew better. My father never bragged. My mother quietly printed 3 copies of the article that mentioned his name and placed one in the drawer where she kept important documents. Just for records, she said. But I saw her smile when she thought no one was looking. A year later, I left my firm and opened a small community design studio with my father as a consulting craftsman. We did not design luxury hotels. We restored school libraries with cracked floors. We redesigned clinic waiting rooms, so children would feel less afraid. We helped a women's shelter turn an old dining hall into a place that felt less temporary. My mother handled food for our opening event. But this time, there was a sign on the table. Refreshments, lovingly prepared by May Harper. When she saw it, she pressed a hand to her mouth. Too much, she whispered. No, I said. Bare minimum. She laughed, then cried, then told everyone they had to try the lemon almond cake. It sat at the center of the table, where it belonged. There was no crystal chandelier that day, no string quartet, no imported roses arranged to impress people who already believed they deserved beauty. There were folding chairs, fresh paint, mismatched mugs, children from the neighborhood running between adults, and my father standing by a restored bookshelf explaining to a little boy how wood remembers touch. My mother wore the blue dress again. This time, she did not ask if it was too bright. Julian came to the opening. I did not invite him, but I did not ask him to leave. He stood near the back, quieter than I remembered. When my father saw him, there was no warmth in his face, but no cruelty either. Julian approached my parents first. He did not offer excuses. He simply said, "I'm sorry for what I allowed." My mother nodded. My father said, "I hope you become someone who doesn't need loss to teach him courage." Julian accepted that, like a man accepting a sentence he knew was fair. Then he came to me. "You built something beautiful," he said. "We built something honest." He smiled sadly. That too. For a moment, we were just two people, standing in the ruins of what almost was. He handed me an envelope. "I won't ask you to read it." I took it. "Okay. And I won't ask you to answer." "Good." There was a pause. Then he said, "I loved you badly." That sentence reached me. Not enough to reopen the door, enough to close it without hatred. "I know," I said. He nodded. Then he left. I read the letter that night. It was not dramatic, not manipulative, not full of promises to fight his family or win me back. It was an apology, a real one. He wrote about my mother's tray, my father's towel, the chair. He wrote that for months, he had thought silence made him peaceful, when really it only made him available to whoever was cruelest in the room. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not with important things, not in the trash, somewhere in between. That felt right. People sometimes ask if I regret returning the ring. They ask because the diamond was valuable, because Julian was sorry, because walking away from wealth looks like sacrifice from the outside. But I do not remember that night as the night I lost a mansion, a ring, or a husband. I remember it as the night my mother stopped carrying a tray that was never hers. The night my father walked out of a room that mistook humility for permission. The night I realized love is not proven by how beautifully someone includes you when it is easy. Love is proven by whether they defend your dignity when silence would benefit them. So no, I did not return the ring because I stopped believing in love. I returned it because I finally understood where love had been standing all along. It was in my mother's nervous smile as she asked if her dress was good enough. It was in my father's old black shoes polished 3 times. It was in a lemon almond cake carried home from a house that did not deserve it. It was in the hands that built my first table, repaired old wood, and held mine when I chose myself. And if this story found a quiet place in you, stay with us. There are more stories here about people who finally stopped bowing their heads. Because the first family I ever belonged to was already standing right in front of me, and this time, I did not leave them behind.